What's going on? This is Brett Snodgrass, and I just want to welcome you guys to the Brett Snodgrass podcast today. I have Peter Ostapko on this podcast episode with me, and Peter's the founder and a publisher of the Kinsmen Journal. And I'm going to tell you what, guys, I have bought a lot of books, read a lot of books. I don't even know what to call this, but it's a 240-page Peter actually calls it an artifact with essays and pictures, beautiful pictures, just this masterpiece for men of faith or of fatherhood and of work. Those three sections are what they talk about: faith, fatherhood, and work. And it's just a masterpiece that I use as a resource and a tool literally every single day of my life. These are real stories from real men, beautiful pictures, and I can walk through the stories with them. And he is the founder and publisher of this book that I actually just bought 50 copies to give away as gifts because it has meant that much to me, and I don't say that lightly. So the Kinsmen Journal, and he's also bivocational, right? He's a commercial lender at a community bank, and he does this as a side project, and he really is calling men to become more focused and intentional about what really matters in their life, especially in those three areas: faith, fatherhood, and work. I'm going to welcome you guys to the show with Peter Ostapko, but I also want to mention, before I welcome Peter, is to go over to our website at irondeep.com. We just posted 3 events for next year, guys, and the first one is the Men's Awakening. We're going to be heading out to Zion National Park. It is beautiful, guys. God's glory and creation everywhere. We're going to be taking about 30 guys out there, 30 to 35 guys, to visit Zion National Park. We've rented out a couple of houses on 25 acres in Zion National Park, right at the foot of a mountain. You can check that retreat out. It's March 13th through the 16th. The costs and all the details are on our website at irondeep.com. We got that. We also have a soulmate retreat because these are for businessmen that want to really deepen their faith and relationship with God with their spouse. And that's going to be in Palm Springs. That's May 8th through the 11th, 2023. So check out that event on irondeep.com too. We got some awesome things, guys. Our community is growing. A lot of people are talking about what we're doing. And I'm just excited because God is faithful. And this is a passion of mine. I see myself doing this Iron Deep, building out this community for the next 20, 30 years of my life, and then just passing it on. It's not about Brett Snodgrass. It's about the Lord and what he's doing and how he's restoring men's hearts and lives and the marketplace and their families and organizations. So I'm super excited about what we're doing here. And if you guys are interested, check it out, irondeep.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel. We had just had a new video that came out about the loneliness of men. I just had a conversation with a guy, and he said, "You know what? I'm alone. I feel alone. I'm a business owner, and I feel just alone." And I said, well, a lot of people can relate to that. So just came out that video. Check it out on our YouTube channel about the loneliness of men. So now I can't wait to just introduce you guys now to Peter Ostapko. Here we go. What's going on? I have a guest on today's podcast, Peter Ostapko. What's going on, Peter?
Hey, how's it going, bud? Good to see you.
You too. I'm looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, me too.
I love what you're doing, man. I heard you on another podcast, and I got the Kinsmen Journal, which is basically a masterpiece. We're going to really dive into that, guys. If you're a man out there, especially in the marketplace, which a lot of guys listening to this podcast are men in the marketplace, you're going to want to get your hands on the Kinsmen Journal that Peter and his team has put together. So we're going to dive into that. But before I really start just, bragging about the Kinsmen Journal that I use pretty much on a daily basis, let's just talk about you, man. Like, who is Peter Ostapko?
Yeah, so Midwest kid, born and raised in Southwest Missouri. Met my wife at Evangel University here in Springfield. I only went there for a year, but she came down from Wisconsin, so she's a northern girl, and we met. And I knew from the get-go that she was the one that I wanted to marry someday. So I waited a little bit of time before I told her that, and then she said yes. And
You didn't do that on the
yeah,
first
man,
date?
no,
That
not on the
wasn't part of the
first date.
conversation.
No,
Like, I
I
think you're
could
the
have told
one.
her. Yeah. I'm kind of an old soul, and she is a little bit too. So I think maybe she would have received it well, but I held off a little bit. But yeah, so we got married young. We've been married for 16 and a half years, have a 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and then we actually have a 3.5 month old. So yeah, so it's been amazing. Like
That's awesome.
I have a great family, my wife and kids. It's an everyday blessing.
Mm.
We're definitely in the it's wonderfully exhausting stage. But I don't know if that really changes much. It just changes maybe from physically to mentally.
Yeah.
But love being a dad, love being having 3 kids. I work in the corporate world. I'm in banking and finance. I have been in the industry for about a decade. So I do commercial lending for investment properties, for new developments, for owner operated property, CNI, small business, a variety of different types of things here for a local community bank. So I am bivocational. So that I'm from this area, so that's given me a lot of opportunity to get to know people in my community, in the region, in the banking space. But then, yeah, I'm a publisher of this journal, and we'll get into some of the details of how that all came to be. But I'm a very busy guy, not just for the sake of saying busy, but I'm very intentional about the time that I have and using it the way that I like to.
Mm.
Outside of work and outside of the journal and my family, we're very involved in our church, and that takes up about 98% of my life. So,
Mm. Wow. That's
yeah,
awesome. Very, very
yep,
intentional. And I just really got that out of the Kinsman Journal number one. It is extremely intentional. And I ordered a copy. Like I said, I heard you on a podcast a couple months ago.
yeah,
And I don't get impressed that easy, honestly. There's a lot of stuff out there. And typically, order a book. I ordered a lot of books. A lot of my friends write books. And figured, oh, that'd be just, you get this book and it's just whatever, and it's good, it's okay. But this was
yeah,
definitely, I was impressed. So I got
yeah,
this. This is basically a 240 page, just kind of this masterpiece, which is not, I don't even know how to describe it, I guess. And I think that's, a book or magazine or whatever, that's not even able to describe exactly what it is.
yeah.
Because it's basically this 200, maybe you can describe it. So I'm using these words, but how would you describe this Kinsman Journal kind of masterpiece, book slash magazine,
Yeah.
what is this and this
It's so
awesomeness?
funny. It's so funny you say that because people in the publishing world are like, "Oh, this isn't a magazine." You know what I mean? But it's it's a magazine and it's a periodical in the sense that there'll be future volumes, and so this is whereas a book typically it's just one book and it
Mm-hmm.
stands alone,
Yeah.
and this certainly can do that. But we have intentions and hopes to continue to pump out these volumes in the future. But yeah, I think it was John Tyson who we sent a copy to. John is just a tremendous voice in the Christian leadership space, but specifically with the formation of men and a variety of different things. He pastors a church out in New York City. We sent him a copy of the journal early on just to thank him, just for his insight, influence, and just we've learned a lot from him as well as quite a few other different people that we just wanted to bless and honor and just thank them, even though they didn't know who we were. So we sent it to him, and he did a story on his Instagram, which was really neat. And so we had a lot of people that found found out about us through that.
Mm.
But something that he said, I was like, that's actually a great description. He goes, it's an artifact,
Mm.
because it is a timeless piece of stories, essays, visual. It's very, very visual. We wanted to lean into the images because men are very image driven.
Mm.
So all of the photos in the journal were original shot. Like we didn't use any stock photos, with the exception of one. There's actually one stock photo in the entire journal, but there's like over 150 pictures, so it's
Yeah.
just one.
Yeah.
But we wanted to, personally, I wanted to provide something and create something that I wanted to read that I was not seeing out there in the marketplace.
Mm.
And so I said, you know what, let's just create it. I want to do this. And so that, I'm saying this now, like, hey, let's just get up and do it. It's a very long process and it's taken quite a few years. But we were methodical, we were careful, and we just have been, just waiting on the Lord and allowing him to guide and direct each and every step. And, when you're launching something, whether it's a business or an endeavor, or doing anything of this magnitude, it takes time, and
Mm.
and sometimes though it's a good thing because it allows, I mean, personally, it really allowed the Lord to just purify some of the intentions behind why I was doing this. It also just allowed us to really clarify what exactly we wanted to do with it. What do we want to just create something for the sake of creating it? Or do we want to really be very intentional about the stories we were telling, the words we were saying, the language that we were using, and the voice that we were creating when speaking to men? So
Yeah.
those things take time to develop. So the result is 240-page publication. We printed it using the foremost printer in North America out of Vancouver. So we printed 2,000 of these journals. They're beautiful. I mean, they're a tabletop piece. They weigh almost 2.5, 3 pounds. You will keep this on your table. All the content's timeless. Our anchors of content is faith, fatherhood, and work. And so in each section, we have a couple of short essays, a couple of long writing features, a photography feature, and some wrap up. But the content's really designed to open up and provoke thought and conversation, whether that's internally between you and yourself, whether that's between you and your wife, or that's between you and, of course, the Lord, or for a gathering or a group setting where you're having conversations ongoing with other men and other discussions. But it's a resource. It's a tool that we wanted to use. So that's the quick elevator spiel. I mean, and ultimately I said, listen, there's nothing quite like what I want to create out there, and someone needs to do it. And I really think guys are going to love it. And so that's what we did.
Yeah.
And so everybody we've talked to has loved it. And I love how you said you don't really know how to describe it, because I love books. Like I read books, but everybody gets books, and they're all printed with the same font, and they all have the same paperweight, and they have really snazzy covers. But then once you get in, and there's great content. And if you want to dive into, a book on a certain subject or topic, that's why books exist. There's so much rich, content there on history or on leadership or development or fill in the blank, whatever, culture. But what I think is so unique about this journal is that it's very, very rich in imagery. The paper is very, very thick. It's glossy. I mean, there's an art and there's a beauty about it that I think is just really, it's very tactilely luxurious. And so people love that. In a digital first age, people are looking for places and sources where they can disconnect from technology. And so that's why we've published it the way that we have. It's not online. It's not going to be online. And so we didn't want to cheapen it down, because honestly, here's the other side of it is we are telling stories, first person account stories of men and their walk with the Lord and their walk with life. And so I found that to be a very, very honoring, sacred space. And I did not want to print it on really cheap disposable paper that people are just going to throw away. And there's nothing wrong with printing cheap magazines and all that. That's fine. It's just not the model that we wanted to do. We wanted to be very, very careful about every detail of what we were creating. And so I think going back to John Tyson and what he said, it's a modern day cultural artifact for men is what it is.
I love
testifying to the goodness and faithfulness of Jesus in our lives. So,
amen. And you are exactly right. I mean, I've moved it around, stuffed it in my bags, and it's still not crumpled. It's just it's still the exact same. And I love that it sits on my coffee table. And like I said, I read it in the mornings, and it's just been a great resource in my life.
I love that.
A couple things that I want to ask you about. So obviously, this is for men, a lot of stories of first account, stories of men. And you kind of went with the topics, 3 sections, right? You talked about faith, you talked about fatherhood, and you talked about work. So let's just talk about maybe the ideas behind that first and foremost. Why those topics? You could have went an array of directions with things.
Yeah.
So talk about those 3 things.
Yeah, if you think about it, our faith, who we are as fathers or as dads, and our work. I mean, those 3 pillars really encompass most of our life, And so, there's a lot of content out there about faith, and there's a lot of content out there about work, and there's definitely some content out there about fatherhood. And in the spiritual space, it's kind of, I feel like it's somewhat dated, especially in the fatherhood, but a lot of it, I mean, we've seen quite a bit of a revival here in the last 3 to 5 years. And I don't think that's by accident. I think it's just, again, like what we're a part of and what I believe the Holy Spirit is doing in the hearts of men. But I wanted to kind of bring all 3 together, because they're really not compartmentalized. They work incongruent. I think about who I am as a dad is not different than who I am as Peter, the commercial lender, or as Peter, a follower of Christ. Like that's, no, I'm Peter, but I'm all of those things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to really kind of intersect those three because they're really not separate. And the way that we live our lives is incongruent. And so there's a lot of really great content out there on faith, but I didn't want to like get into like theological debates about, scripture and all that. There's a place for that. We're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And with fatherhood, there's a lot of great practical applications and 10 ways to be a great dad and 5 ways to engage with your kids and and all that's great again, but that's not what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the workspace, I actually almost landed on entrepreneurship. I was going to do faith, fatherhood, and entrepreneurship, but I switched it to work because the Holy Spirit was very clear. It's like not everybody's an entrepreneur, nor does everybody need to be an entrepreneur. Because honestly, if everybody was an entrepreneur, a lot of things wouldn't get done. We'd just be kind of circling the clouds and vision casting all the time and dreaming. And so there's a place for the worker. There's a place for that. And so I wanted to, in the work section, really just honor the dignity of all the work that men do. Whether you're a teacher or a professor or a doctor or a real estate professional or a janitor, or a pastor or a banker or whatever it may be, the work that you do is anointed, it's holy, it's important. So we wanted to speak to that. And so I just, I say this now with such clarity, but this took years for this to unfold. This is not something that happened overnight. We did a full 2-year, I really kind of got some clarity on like, okay, I want to publish something in January of 2017. I read a book that really just sparked my imagination. And for the next 2 years, I just did a deep dive into the publishing industry. I learned a lot about independent printing. I learned a lot about, different magazine publishers, why certain ones were scrapped and done with, and why others were seeing, emergence and growth and success. And so what I found is that people actually really love print, but they don't want print that can be readily translated to digital, so it's like if they want to read the news, they're just going to go online or they're going to get an update about it. Right. Mm-hmm. But if you want to read a story, you'd rather do it in a print form, like even like a really long essay. It's just, you don't want to read it online because it's just exhausting to read it. So actually a lot of times, and people I talk to too, I'll just print off a longer essay and I'll just read it, print it off because there's just a different experience with that.
Yeah.
So anyways, we just did a deep dive into the industry. And so, and then I went to my local Barnes and Noble, and there's just a lot of variety of content there available. But there's so much for women. There was hundreds, if not, maybe 1,000 different titles available, and so many of them for women that are so great. And there's very enriching content, very affirming, encouraging, thought-provoking stuff. But for guys, it was really limited to fortune, fast company, success, cars, and then obviously the perversion, muscle. Yeah. Stuff. And then of course, just, the other stuff that guys get wrapped up in with that. So I just said, guys, we just have a lot more to offer. I think there's a lot more buried deep in the heart and soul of men. And so I want to speak to those things. And so from a business standpoint, there was a gap in the marketplace and I wanted to fill it. But from a practical standpoint, the Lord just said, listen, you need to do this, and I'm going to provide the way. And so I just said, yes. Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. The other thing I really love about just kind of looking through this really spoke to me was just all the variety. You use poems, essays, stories, just so much different varieties. Some of them are long, some of them are short. Obviously, the photography was amazing in it. I love that you used a lot of different voices. It wasn't just your voice constantly or a few people's voices. I don't know how many people contributed to this, but so many voices and faces. And it really was just real people, not famous authors. There was a couple of people or some people in there that own businesses, pastors, things like that, but it wasn't people that we heard of. So it was kind of just regular, everyday people, everyday men. So I love that about it. So where did you kind of come, use that? And so number one, the variety, the different voices and faces, And like, how did you, I mean, that in alone probably took a lot of work to gather those people. I don't know how many people contributed to this, number one.
Yes. Well, yeah, it did take a lot, and it's a lot of, but we had nearly 30 writers. Yeah, 30 writers for volume one, and about another dozen creatives between, graphics and illustrators and photographers. So nearly 40 to 45 people that we had on this project. And yeah, it's a lot of quarterbacking, it's a lot of directing. And I'm a trained banker. I didn't go to journalism school, and I haven't, been doing this for 5 or 10 years. I was around it some when I was a kid. My father was in publishing in some local magazines, and so I got to kind of be around that a little bit when I was young. So I've always just been drawn to the printed word. And so this is really, I see a kind of a manifestation of some of those desires of my heart that the Lord just brought full circle in my own life. But yeah, I guess for me, when I was looking to publish this, I didn't want to create something that is already being done. I didn't want to. I don't want to make this sound the wrong way, but there's about 100, maybe 50 or 100 different kind of voices in the Christian leadership theology space, and they get all the radio waves, and they write tons of books, and that's great, and they're wonderful, and they're gifted, and God has anointed them, and we all learn from them, and that's great. But that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in getting stories from everyday people, because I knew stories of people that I knew in my own life. Like one of the writers. This is way back in. I think it was. Let me think. This would have been in the fall of 2019. I sat down with this couple, and they ended up writing an essay in the Fatherhood section on infertility. And I sat down with them, and I was actually asking them about the photography, because they owned a photography design studio. And I said, hey, if I'm going to get, this many original shots, and then they need to be edited, and, I want ultimately probably about 12 or 15 for the spread, what's that going to cost? Because I was building the budget. I was building out what is it going to take to produce.
So that's my next question. I was like, wow,
yeah,
45 people, you got to have a big
yeah.
budget.
And they all got paid, and they all were paid at or above market, every single one of them, with the exception of myself. And that was the other thing about it that was different when I was researching, going back to in 2017 and 18. They said that the things that have crippled the industry are everybody wants freebies now. People like, hey, can you write an essay for us, and we'll tweet about it? And it's like, there's just no value with that anymore, because social media has just become a racket. Like, we use it some for the journal, just because people are on it, and you're finding people here and there. But we don't have this overarching, strategy to try to penetrate social media, because we don't control the algorithm. It's really a false reality of what real life is for most people. And so, but anyways, when we were publishing, or we were getting these people together, I said, I want people to tell real stories about who they are and what God is doing in their lives, or the challenges and all those things. So I sat down with this couple, and I knew a little bit about their story, but I looked at him and I said, listen, and they were telling me what the costs were going to be for the photography and all that. And I just said, I have one last question for you. Would you be willing to write about your story, and about a little bit about your guys' journey through infertility? And his wife just started tearing up. And I just knew I was onto something, that there's just a relatability factor about everyday people.
Yeah.
God is no respecter of persons. And so I think sometimes we can be, we can place a little bit too much emphasis on our celebrity culture, or on even our local pastor. Like our pastor, I love my pastor, but my faith should not be tied to his ability to preach on Sunday. It should be tied to my direct relationship with my Lord and Savior. And my pastor helps usher that in, and he creates an environment with worship and with teaching and with love and compassion. But ultimately, I think so often in Christian culture and American culture, we place people on such pedestals that's unfair to them, because if they fall, and oftentimes they do, or make mistakes, we're so quick to judge. But yet that's not the way it was intended. And so when I was publishing this journal, I wanted to have a unifying approach to it. That's why I don't have pictures of those people in the journal, and they don't have this, I wanted them to be represented, but I did not want the journal to be about any individual people. It was about the collection of what we were all saying together. And that was a part of the editing process as well. But we did get a couple of, writers, well-known, fairly well-known, that really have a heart for this space. And so they were really willing to jump on board. But But people are busy, and the process it took to get these people, to get them to commit, to agree to the amount of words, to get them to write it, to edit it, to go back to them, to edit it again. We did that 25, 30 different times. And so, yeah, it was a very long process, but the Lord provided. I just, one of my favorite stories to tell about this is, again, I'm not a trained writer or publisher, but as we got into this and as we were starting to get some of these essays back and some of the images, I could just tell immediately like the Lord was in it, because there were words that these people were saying, or these images that they were capturing, was exactly what I wanted. But it's impossible to really articulate that perfectly. Like you can say in a letter, like, hey, here, if you could kind of elaborate on this or tell me some stories with this, and we'll tie it all together. But if you're not a trained writer, you don't really know how to do that.
It's hard.
But I just said, oh, it's very, very hard.
Even trained writers.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a thing called writer's block for a reason.
The visionary, even to articulate what you want, and then they
absolutely.
It's hard.
Yeah. That's why I knew when we were getting these back, I just was like, Lord, you're so good, because he was so intimately involved. Because again, Brett, this isn't about Peter. This is about us creating this journal. It is a collection of the things of God and what he is doing in the lives of people. And we wanted to put that on display. And so I think this is a really good, just lesson for all of us to learn. But if we're willing to kind of take ourselves out of the equation and truly just be used and be conduits by which what God wants to do in our lives, I think we'll be pretty amazed at how God can use us. It's when our pride and our ego and our belief that we have it figured out gets in the way, where things slow down or things get stalled, because we're striving, and striving is not of God.
Yeah.
And so we were just really intentional, not perfect, of just, Lord, what do you want to do here? What does this essay need to say? And so, yeah, the Lord just blessed that. It's been remarkable. But that's been a very common response from people is, I love that there's just everyday people showcased in the journal. One of my favorite stories to tell on that is, in the fatherhood section, we did this photography feature in baseball, and I love baseball. It's just a sweet sport, and my own history, my own life. But there's just a historical nature of it. People get very romantic about baseball, and one guy wrote, a short little poem about his dad. And it was just it was called My Mighty Dad. And, the guy's mid-30s. But he works for a local, and I think he's an inventory specialist for a local manufacturing company. He works hard, provides, does his job. But his bio in the wrap-up section was next to Dr. Tim Elmore, who is like the foremost thought leader in Generation Z and Generation Y in development, interaction, communication, speaks all over the world. And so I just was like, this is exactly what I was going for, is there's a commonality there, and we didn't bold and highlight Dr. Elmore, and he wouldn't have wanted us to. And so that's kind of the beauty of this journal. It's like, hey, this is about all of us, and we're all doing this together, and we wanted to showcase it. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've already mentioned that photography was a huge piece in this, and that obviously really just shines through. I mean, sometimes just from page to page, it's just one amazing, magnificent picture, and just people, right? Just everyday people you captured, just the faces so beautifully. Obviously, that took a lot of intentionality too. So a lot of times when you're thinking about writing essays, you don't think about the images or the photography as much, or you put in a stock photo, like you said, which you guys used one, which I'm interested which one that was, but you don't have to talk about that. But
right.
But yeah,
it's true. It's true. You have to think about visually what is going to correspond with this.
Yeah.
You got to think about that. And some of them it's a lot easier than others depending on the shoot.
Like the one, like you had a story in there, like, just for an example, there was, one of the main, I think in the middle is talking about living an adventure, and he had a gentleman and he was going on this amazing adventure in the mountains, trucking through the snow.
Oh, so this is an amazing story. So I got to tell the story. Every single one of these has a story. Every single one of these has a story. So the writer of that, Dr. Brian Jarrett, he's a pastor down in Texas. And what's really, really neat is, to the reader, they may not know this, but he was writing about this trip that he was going to take, but he wasn't going to take the trip for like another 6 months. But he was corresponding, or he was writing about like the adventure and risk taking with God. And I said, okay, well, how do we mirror images to go with this? Because he hasn't gone
He
on the
hasn't done
trip
it
yet.
yet. Yeah.
So our photographer, and he climbs mountains and takes pictures and does stuff all over the world. Like, and it's an amazing story how I met him. So, but I'll tell that story a different time. But anyways, so he's like, well, actually, I'm getting sponsored to go climb Mount, I have to say this right, Alpamayo, which is in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going down there. He's like, yeah, I'm going to take probably like 10,000 photos. I just have to, take some shots of like product placement, stuff like that for these companies, but they're paying for the trip. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, oh yeah. So he got these shots. I mean, they're just spectacular images.
Yeah.
Spectacular. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just stories of that, of how it just all came together.
That's awesome.
But for me, it's like, I want to show these images because they're beauty. I mean, this is God's creation.
Yeah.
Like, this is beauty. And I wanted to, honor this man and his talents of him taking those photos and being able to compensate him to do that, And so it's just, how that came together is just one of my favorites. It's just, but the images are just spectacular.
Yeah.
I mean, and they just jump off the page. And that's why we went with the glossy page rather than like a muted kind of a matte, because the images, I wanted the colors to be bold and vibrant and just pop. Because guys are very image driven. Culturally, we really are now.
Because it makes you feel, I mean, when I was reading that, just the article, the essay about the adventure, I mean, I was right there with him. I was walking right there with him. I was like, I was cold.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, it's freezing out here.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Man.
Totally.
That's it. One thing's in your video, so on your website, and this might be in the Kinsmen Journal as well, you talked about kind of like one of the big reasons for putting this together was calling men to live with a sense of urgency instead of passivity.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to talk about your own life because you did take your time on this. And that's one of the pieces of advice that I got when I started our organization, Iron Deep, is to take it slow, to take your time.
Yeah.
And you obviously did that, but with a sense of urgency. So can you kind of like unwind that for us a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would translate urgency to focused. We're distracted about everything right now. Everything. There are so many things clamoring for our attention and time. I mean, social media, sports, kids sports, television, relationships, work, working out, I mean, you just name it. I mean, there's so many things, and there's only so much time that you have.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is urgency is having the awareness and knowing and understanding that my time is finite and limited. You're not guaranteed tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, the time that you have with the people that you care about or that God has entrusted you to lead and to steward well, whether that's your family, your kids, your spouse, your coworkers, your employees, a company, whatever it may be, that's not an indefinite thing. And so there are going to be endless amounts of distractions or things that will take away from what matters most. And so urgency is the awareness that there are a plethora of things out there that I could give my time and attention to, but I am choosing to be focused and intentional about the things that are most important. And most important because it's what God's word says. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm to be the caretaker and the steward and the leader of my children and my family. Like, listen, I remember my pastor used to say this years ago. He said, he goes, for the first 10, 15 years of my kid's life, he goes, people would ask, like, what are your hobbies? He goes, I have children. I don't have the luxury of hobbies. Right. And he's right about that. And like, don't get me wrong, like, you got to have time where you go do something that you enjoy. But there's a difference in like working out for like 30, 45 minutes a day, or maybe going on a walk, a specialty walk for an hour, a couple times a week, or whatever that looks like. And, taking 6 hours to go play golf with your buddies on Saturday. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, like that, there's a difference there. Yeah. Like, do it every now and then, or bring your kids, whatever. But like, those times that you have with your children are extremely limited and important. Mm-hmm. I mean, I even see it in my own kids. I've seen, like, my son's 8, and I've seen how, like, I have shifted with him from being everything's fun, everything's laughing, everything's goofy, wrestling, to, no, I'm having to really parent and inject areas of discipline and instruction now, because he's pushing the limits of his independence, and he wants to know what are my boundaries and what can I do and what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah.
And so if I'm just distracted or I'm just numbing myself with, my phone or just saying, here, just go play video games. Well, what I'm doing, I'm being completely passive and I'm being lazy because I'm not taking the time to do what's necessary. And that's love my father or love my son as his father, being intentional about his development, his well-being and who he is.
Wow.
So, I mean, and I'm learning this. Like, this isn't like, hey, Peter's got a PhD in dad, like, no, like I'm learning this. But, I just recognize that there are so many things clamoring for our attention and time. And so for our family, there are just certain things that we have really held sacred. So Saturdays are very sacred for us. We don't do the whole traveling team. We don't do all the sports stuff. We do sports, but they don't monopolize our family's life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're very intentional about that time on Saturdays, especially. Number one, it partially is because we can do that now. That could change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important for men, especially, to say, okay, like, what areas of my life where I'm being maybe lazy with my family or with my kids that I can really, take it up a notch, or where maybe has my wife been taking on extra slack that I could potentially step in and say, you know what, babe, I think I need to take ownership of this a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a place of shame or anything like that. It's like you have a tremendous opportunity to speak life over your children. And as a father and as a man, you carry, just because you're a man, a God-ordained, anointed presence and purpose behind you because you're a man and because you're a father. And if you love the Lord, I mean, good gracious, like, you have tremendous opportunity to impart wisdom and truth and love and compassion that will shape your children. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen. I like to say, I try not to measure things in days and weeks or even months. I measure them in years.
Yeah.
Because, like, some weeks are awful. Like, there's times where it's just like, this was a really bad day. Like, or you said some things, you're like, I shouldn't have said that,
Mm-hmm.
So don't measure it in those, days and weeks. Measure it in months or years, because, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, wow, I'm so glad my son every single Saturday morning went out for an hour and just talked. Or once a week, I would rotate the kids and take them to school and we go get breakfast before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, create those things, those moments. You have to be intentional about that, because life will suck it out. Life will find a way to fill it with something else. So anyways, yeah. So that's a little bit of that, what I would say.
Yeah.
So.
No, I love that. I love what you said. Sometimes we get just overwhelmed even thinking about all the things that you're saying. Maybe just take one thing, and just one thing is sacred. For us, I just found ourselves, the dinner table is something that we can sit down and we can have, and I don't even know what's going to happen. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes it's awesome, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
But just to have that space of that sacred, the table. So maybe if you're listening, just what is one thing, right, that you can kind of keep sacred in your life? That's awesome. Peter, we're about out of time, but I just want to ask you this one last question. So again, I feel a lot of this just from you is, you took the initiative and took the risk. I think a lot of what's written in here is about men, becoming focused on what really matters and taking the risk. And you've obviously done that with the Kinsmen Journal. But that came with a lot of wrestling, I think, through your life. I even listened to one of your stories about having severe anxiety and kind of wrestling with God with that. So what would maybe you speak to the men out there that are just kind of in that wrestling mode? Because I think we all go through these seasons of wrestling with God or a call to our life, or, what's he guiding me to? But we kind of have this comfort zone. And talk to the men out there about that with your own life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a quote that I came across, it was actually on a video about 5-6 years ago, that I've really just leaned into quite a bit, and I've just remembered it and I've used it a lot, is, God doesn't waste anything. He's always taking what you're doing and weaving it into where you're going. And I love that because, so often we get tripped up in the moment. God, why am I going through this? Why don't my kids listen to me? Why is my company, we're down 50% in sales and, expenses are skyrocketing? Why? And I think for me, I would just say this is that moment where I started to go through extreme anxiety. There's a lot of story there, and I'd love to do a follow-up conversation just on that, because there's a lot to unpack there. But I would say this is, every single one of us has unique stories and experiences, whether it be through childhood or whether it's through our spouse or relationship or work. Those experiences, they shape who we become. They shape our thoughts. They shape our perspective. They physically affect who we are. And when I started to go through this severe anxiety, it was only for about an 8 to 10 week period. There are people who deal with it for very, very long periods of time. But for me specifically, what it was, and this was just last year, January of 2021, we're like 75% of the way through of creating this journal. We're starting to hit some momentum. And then literally on a Sunday night, January, I think it would have been January 2nd or 3rd. I think it was the 2nd or 3rd. You have to look up the date. I literally am sitting on my couch watching the Cowboys and the Giants football game. My wife's in the other room. The kids are in bed. And I literally just can't. I'm just like shaking and I can't sit still. I'm like, what in the world is going on? I thought it was an attack. We immediately label things as a spiritual attack. But as time kind of went on over the next few days, and I would go through highs and lows and highs and lows. And there'd be times over the next, 8 to 10 weeks where I thought I was going to die. I thought literally my heart I was going to have a heart attack, stress. Like I'm like, what is going on? And I just literally just poured it all out. Like David in the Psalms, I was just pouring it out to the Lord. I'm like, Lord, why? What is going on? And what he needed to do was peel back layers of my heart, things that I buried deep, 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 deep. That he was like, listen, I'm ready to peel these out. I'm ready to heal these areas, these wounds that you've buried deep in your life. And really how it manifested was, I had a fear of abandonment because of some things that I experienced as a kid, especially with my father. And I should say my dad and I still talk to this day. He lives in Pennsylvania. So him and I connect. But when he left, it just left some very, very broken things in my life that I've just buried deep. And so for that period of time, the Lord said, listen, I need to heal this from you so that you're not carrying this burden anymore. And so that's what he did. And so it was a very difficult time. I wrestled with God because it was very, very hard. But out of it, it was a trusting, it was a belief. It was just this intimacy with my Heavenly Father that I didn't go there before, that I needed to because of where he was taking me with the journal, with my family, with relationships, with all of those things. And listen, God will do this through and with anybody. You just have to have an open heart. You have to posture yourself to say, Lord, how do you want to use me as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a business leader? And just wait on the Lord. Something that we so easily do is we just rush into things. And there are times for quick decisions and moving fast. Absolutely. But there's a time to wait on the Lord patiently. He purifies your intentions. He purifies the heart. He purifies to find out, to say, listen, is this of me or is this of you? Who are you building, your kingdom or mine? And he would ask me these questions and I would say, okay, this is what we want to do. This is what we want to do. But through that process, I just became my relationship with the Lord grew so much. And I know we say that in the Christian world so much, but like literally, no, my faith matured in areas it never had been before. And so it came to a point when we were starting to do some things with the journal. There was just no doubt. I'm like, God's in this. I know he's doing this. He's spoken to me. And there was an authority that came not out of because of anything I did, but because of what he did through me. But God, if there are areas of your life that are burdensome, that bring stress, that bring anxiety, you need to lay those before the throne. You need to wait on the Lord in that space. And you need to just prayerfully open your hands and say, God, help me, and he will absolutely do that. And he will do it in the time that it takes, that he sees fit, not that you. So it could be a day, could be an hour. Not all of us have these Paul Barnabas transfiguration moments like that. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, or years. And that's also a reason why we need to have grace and patience with other people, because everybody's on a different track, and what their faith looks like, and they're learning it in different ways. But that was such an important part of this journey. And I speak to say this too, is God doesn't need Kinsmen Journal, right? He doesn't need it. Like God's God, glorious, fire, like he's God, right? But he said, hey, Peter, listen, I got something for you. It's going to bring fulfillment in your life like never before. And it's going to be the journey of a lifetime. And there's going to be some things that are going to be very difficult, but there's also going to be some incredible victories and moments of just glory and beauty. but I want you to come on board. Are you willing to take this journey with me? And I said yes.
Mm.
And the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to tell my kids that I took the risk, that I took the chance. It's easy not to. We live in a very safe world, safe in the sense that we have insurance policies for everything. We have, safety measures for everything. And there's a place for those things to an extent. But I so often would fall to paralysis by analysis, and I would just shy away from taking big risks because I'm like, no, I'm afraid this is going to happen or this is going to happen. But God brought me through that place to say, listen, you're going to have to trust me. You're going to have to trust me with this anxiety, that this place of abandonment, I will not abandon you. You're a good father to your kids. It's not going to happen. They're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're going to have to trust me. And then that trust turned into areas with the journal in my life where I'm like, listen, if the Lord's in it, then he's going to make it happen because it's his. It's not mine. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for sharing with us today. Thank you for sharing.
Oh,
your story,
you bet, buddy.
Man.
You bet.
And I love the Kinsmen Journal. Best place for someone to get the Kinsmen Journal is where? Kinsmenjournal.com?
Yeah, kinsmenjournal.com. We have some videos on there. Shares a little bit of background on kind of the origin story and behind the scenes and some of that. We're most active on Instagram. I personally have started to do some more stuff through LinkedIn personally. But yeah, kinsmenjournal.com. We ship it out. This has been one of the neatest parts about this journal. People will get it, and then within a week or two, they'll order 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 more because there's just nothing like it. And I say that with confidence because I'm so proud of what God has done through these people and what he has done. And just the men that we've heard from across the country and across the world has just been extremely affirming. So we're just very, very grateful with what we've been able to do. So
definitely. Well, if you're listening, I would highly encourage you to get the Kinsmen Journal. I know I just talked to Peter before the show. I said, hey, how can I put an order of 50? So, and I don't say that ever, right? So it's definitely something that's just a great tool and a resource for my life that just helped me grow in my faith and mature in my faith. So thank you so much, Peter. And that's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you so much, Peter, for being on the show.
You bet, buddy. Thank you. Appreciate it.